Hi everyone. Thanks for joining me to talk about how you can use SQL Server and Azure SQL to transform your business from edge to the cloud. I'm Asad Khan, Partner Director of Program Management in Azure Data Engineering Group. I lead the program management for all databases, including SQL Server, Azure SQL, Cosmos DB, open source databases, and Azure Arc-enabled data services. Today, I'm going to share some of the latest advancements we have made to SQL Server and Azure SQL family that allow you to use SQL to unify data across all your assets so you can innovate faster. I'm part of an engineering team, and just like all of you, we carry the responsibility of turning big, brilliant ideas into something that drives transformation in your organization. Of course, the best ideas don't come from thinking about what's possible with what we have got today. They come from dreaming about what we wish we could do, independent of the complexity of the problem we are asked to solve. With no thought on how much data that involves, without a worry about where data assets or data services actually live. To help you draw a clear line between your biggest, brightest ideas and the technology needed to bring them to life, Microsoft offers services and products in three main areas. Number one, cloud databases. Number two, analytics and insights. And number three, data governance. The enhancements we have made in these areas deliver the core capability that companies like yours need to transform your business. We decide what to develop and invest in based on the feedback we hear from the community about what you need to be successful. We also continue to build out complete analytics continuum with unmatched price performance. Our goal is to make intelligent, real-time data insights accessible to people across your organization. And last but not the least, we are providing data governance and security controls for every service so you can remove data silos and feel confident that your data is protected wherever it lives, whether the data is on premises, in the cloud, or at the edge. Today, we are going to focus on the first of these areas, database services. Microsoft offers the most comprehensive set of cloud database services. From Azure Cosmos DB to on-premises SQL Server, we deliver limited scale, performance, and choice to help your team tap into the different data sources you have at your fingertips. What really sets Microsoft apart from other cloud providers, though, is the fact that we enable consistent SQL experience across the way from edge to the cloud. Let's dig into the services that run our Microsoft SQL engine, specifically SQL Server and Azure SQL, which includes SQL Database, Managed Instance, and SQL Server on the virtual machines, as well as the SQL Edge. We are also going to talk about how you can use Azure Arc-enabled data services and Azure Synapse to get even more out of your connected SQL environment. But first up, SQL Server. SQL Server has been around for decades, and we have seen tremendous innovation in the recently releases, due in a large part to the cloud. By building first for Azure SQL Database, we get real-time feedback on new features and refine them faster than we have ever dreamed possible. We roll those enhancements into new box releases of SQL Server, which sets the stage for big advancements in your on-premises capabilities. And so it continues today. With SQL Server 2022, we are pleased to announce a limited preview starting today of this latest release, featuring new innovative features and capabilities that build on what has come before. SQL Server 2022 provides a modern data and analytics platform that supports fully hybrid scenarios. It includes exciting capabilities that solve major challenges for data professionals by offering business continuity through Azure, seamless analytics for your on-prem premises operational SQL Server data with Azure Synapse Analytics, visibility over entire data state, and security with fewest vulnerability over the last 10 years, and industry-leading performance and availability. I like to say that SQL Server 2022 is Azure-enabled, which means it connects your workload to the power of Azure to help you get the best of both worlds. It has been in the works for years, and 2022 release marks a major shift towards enabling hybrid environments for everyone. SQL Server 2022 also continues to provide best-in-class security, performance, and availability by developing new capabilities like the Ledger feature and integration with Azure Purview, which we will get into in a minute. We are building even more intelligence into the actual database operations, so your workload automatically learns how to run better, faster, smarter, without manual tuning or oversight. I want to take a minute to talk about the capabilities highlighted in the previous slide, starting with the built-in intelligence. Now you probably see Query Store and Intelligent Query Processing, or the Intelligent QP, on the screen here, and might think, what's new about that? With Query Store, we are adding support for read replicas and enabling query hints. With Intelligent QP, we are expanding more scenarios based on common customer problems and combining it with Query Store. By combining Query Store and Intelligent QP, we are adding a layer of persistence that the engine can use to access performance history data faster, which effectively makes them both work better together to support certain scenarios. Whereas in the past, you had to opt into using Intelligent QP or Query Store, with the release of SQL Server 2022, we are turning on both capabilities by default for new instances. This means you can start using them from day one without having to set them up. On the screen here, you can see an example of 3 new scenarios we are going to solve through the Intelligent QP and Query Store that make for a much smarter and intelligent database. With the move to a more global distribution of workers and customers, a lot of organizations are moving to a multi-write environment that allows changes to be made to the local database and pushed out to other replicas in a two-way flow of updates. However, if 2 or more people change the same row in the database and different write replicas have different information in them, it used to be that this peer-to-peer replica conflict could stall the entire operation until it was addressed. SQL 2022, we are automating the last writer wins rule, which uses a timestamp for all replicas as recorded to settle any discrepancies. Now, when a conflict is detected, the most recent modification time will be chosen to be persisted in all replicas. This helps keep multi-write scenarios running smoothly. When it comes to protecting your data and data integrity, we have developed a ledger feature in SQL Server, which acts as a tamper-proof ledger that uses cryptographically protected SQL Server to keep track of changes. Earlier this year, we announced the public preview of the Ledger feature in Azure SQL Database, and we are excited to make it part of the latest SQL Server deployment too. The Ledger follows a blockchain structure, meaning a version of the blocks, which in this case are database digests, gets pushed to a separate trusted storage. Verification happens when the trusted storage is compared against the ledger in the database. Using the Ledger feature, you can ensure the accuracy of your data and provide full auditability of all changes. How about we put this into context with a real-life example? Imagine we have got a bank A here, which must routinely perform internal and external audits to demonstrate an auditor or industry regulator that the data hasn't been tampered with. Bank A can use the Ledger feature to maintain a historical track record of all changes made to the database. This works by copying the updated row to a history table to preserve the historical values, and creating a ledger view that shows a chronicle of the data over time. Next, the data is cryptographically protected in the database ledger. The ledger consists of system tables that use a blockchain data structure. We call these cryptographic proofs of the database digests. The database digests get pushed to a trusted storage location to ensure they cannot be tampered with. When it's time to audit the data, the regulatory authority runs a verification process, which works by referencing the database digests, again stored in the tamper-proof storage, and comparing them to real-time calculated hashes in the database. If the hashes of the digest do not match the computed hashes in the database at the time of verification, we know a tampering event has occurred. If they match, it's good to go. As you know, we recently announced the general availability of Azure Purview as a data governance and management service. We are excited to highlight that SQL Server is also closely integrated with Azure Purview. Through this integration, you will be able to automatically scan your on-premises SQL Server for free to capture metadata, classify data using built-in and custom classifiers and Microsoft protection-sensitive labels, and set up and control specific access to rights to SQL Server. We talked about how you can now use the intelligent QP and query store together to run more efficiently. You can also improve the performance of your database by offloading analytics from your operational workloads to Azure Synapse. Up till now, moving data from on-premises databases like SQL Server to Synapse required you to set up ETL. As we all know, setting up and running an ETL pipeline takes a lot of work, and since all the data gets refreshed every time, insights lag behind. And what's happening at this moment today? Synapse Link for SQL Server 2022 provides automatic change feeds that capture the changes within the SQL Server and feed those into SQL pools in Synapse. Once the data hits Synapse, you can combine it with many different data sources, regardless of their size, scale, or format, and run powerful analytics over all of it using your choice of Azure Machine Learning, Spark, or Power BI. Since the automatic change feeds only pull what's new or different, data transfer happens much faster and allows for near real-time insights. It's good for boosting database performance and great for unlocking data insights. The last hero capability that I have time to share with you today is an exciting link feature of SQL Managed Instance that makes it easy to use any Azure data center for disaster recovery. Today, you have been able to do DR in Azure IaaS using VMs for a while, right? And while setting up virtual machines in Azure is less work than setting up an entire secondary data center, it still takes time and maintenance. With the new link feature for SQL Managed Instance, you now can get all the benefits of running a PaaS environment applied for disaster recovery, meaning you spend less time on setup and management even compared to an IaaS environment. It works by using a built-in distributed availability group, or DAG, to replicate data to a previously deployed Azure Managed Instance as a DR replica site. The instance is ready and waiting for whenever you need it. No lengthy configuration or maintenance required. You can also use this link feature in read scale-out scenarios to offload heavy requests that might otherwise affect database performance. We are working on building out more capabilities in the future to support bidirectional data movement. Next, I would like to bring Anna Hoffman in to demonstrate how easy it is to use the link feature in SQL Managed Instance for disaster recovery. Anna, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Assad. I want to show you all how we're bringing the power of Azure SQL to anywhere you are. With SQL Server 2022, you can create a link to Azure SQL Managed Instance for disaster recovery. Let's take a look at an example from our sample Wide World importers. With the rise of e-commerce, they're starting a new venture which is based on email campaigns to subscribing customers. In SQL Server Management Studio, or SSMS, I have connected to WWI Server 02, and we can see the Wide World Importers database. We can connect to this database and run a few queries to understand more information about it, that it's in read-write mode, and we already have 5 email subscribers that have opted in. This database also contains important information like customer orders and inventory. Due to hardware expirations, Wide World Importers is looking for a new disaster recovery, or DR for short, solution. They could purchase more hardware, but on top of being responsible for the hardware, they'll also need to deploy and configure an availability group and distributed availability group. And then on top of all of that, do extensive monitoring and testing to make sure it meets their availability and disaster recovery needs. With Azure SQL Managed Instance and the next version of SQL Server, we're building a seamless experience so you can quickly connect and have a managed disaster recovery site in the cloud. With just a few clicks, I was able to attach the Wide World Importers database previously to the cloud. We can see the availability group and distributed availability group that was deployed and configured for me. I didn't have to do anything. Now that we're linked to Azure SQL Managed Instance, we can take a look at it in the Azure portal. With Azure SQL Managed Instance, I'm going to get automated backups, an availability guarantee of up to 99.99%, and many other benefits that run with the power of a platform as a service. Back in SSMS, I've connected to the linked managed instance. We can start to run queries against it as a read-only endpoint, meaning I can offload read-only workloads to the managed instance. In the results, we see that we are connected to managed instance, and it's a read-only database, and the same data that we see in SQL Server is here. We can also go back to that SQL Server and insert a new subscriber, Isabella Rupp, and of course, we'll see those results in the SQL Server, but we can also go to the managed instance and see those results there as well. So this is a very easy and effective way to get a managed DR solution. Now, let's say there's an outage or hardware upgrade and you need to failover. With this new link feature, you can easily initiate a failover. This simple wizard is going to guide me through all of the steps involved. First, I'm going to have to sign into my Azure account, and then once I'm signed in, I can connect to the Azure SQL Managed Instance I want to fail over to. Once I'm connected to that managed instance, I then have the expected options of doing a planned or forced failover with some information on how to proceed. Within a few moments after initiating this, the failover has kicked off and we can monitor the progress and the steps that are being performed. Once it is complete, we can go back into SSMS and connect to that Azure SQL Managed Instance, which we can now use for write workloads. We can add a new subscriber, Mandy Smith. So we can now use Managed Instance for read and write workloads. This sounds great. Let's consider some scenarios where you want to go back to SQL Server. Maybe the outage is over, or maybe you have some users that can't access the data in Azure for compliance reasons. What if we could restore a SQL Managed Instance database back to SQL Server? Now, with SQL Server, you can. And I am excited to show for the first time that this is possible. Here, you can see how I back up the Wide World Importers Managed Instance database to an Azure Blob storage account using backup to URL. Now, if I switch over to SQL Server, I can then use good old T-SQL to restore that backup file to SQL Server. Notice that I'm giving it a new name, Wide World Importers Back, so we don't get confused. If I go to refresh my databases, we can now see this new database and we can connect to Wide World Importers Back. We can query the subscribers to confirm that our latest entry in Azure SQL Managed Instance, Mandy Smith, is there. So you've seen how you can now use Azure SQL Managed Instance for disaster recovery and restore Azure SQL Managed Instance databases back to SQL Server. This is just one example of how we're bringing the power of Azure to anywhere you are. Thanks, and back to you, Assad.
Thanks, Anna. That was great. This scenario is possible in the first place because we run the same SQL engine in different locations to help you better meet the unique needs of your individual workloads. We offer you choice based on what you want to do. Need to analyze IoT device data? Use Azure SQL Edge. Have to keep machine data on-premises? Run SQL Server. Want to build cloud-native applications? Azure SQL Database is the choice for you. You got some legacy apps you want to retire soon? Move them to SQL Server on Azure virtual machines. Through these various services, we are empowering developers to build once and deploy anywhere by making SQL available across all different options shown here. This is huge. No other cloud provider comes close to enabling this flexibility between environments. Azure SQL Managed Instance is just one of the services that make up the Azure SQL family, which also includes SQL Server on Azure virtual machines and Azure SQL Database. We call this a family because it refers to a collection of both infrastructure as a service and fully managed platform as a service offerings shown here on the screen. Let's run through what makes each one unique and why you might consider one over the other for different scenarios. SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machine works great for lift and shift scenarios in which you want your SQL workloads to maintain 100% compatibility with the original database and the operating system. As we mentioned earlier, Azure SQL Managed Instance is an excellent option for modernizing existing SQL Server applications with minimal code changes. And Azure SQL Database supports modern cloud applications on an intelligent managed service that includes serverless compute. With both PaaS services, Azure SQL Database and SQL Managed Instance, you get evergreen SQL that includes the latest features and capabilities with no updating or patching required. Moving to the fully managed database service with AI-powered feature helps customers see over 200% return on their investment through time saving, speed to market, and new capabilities. There are a handful of new hero capabilities coming to SQL Server on Azure VMs and Azure SQL Managed Instance that I am excited to share with you today. SQL Server on Azure virtual machines saves money and simplifies management of security and high availability, with additional management capabilities at no additional cost when you turn on the IS agent extension. Today, we announced the preview of EB-v5 Azure VMs, a new memory-optimized VM series that delivers up to 300% increase in remote storage performance compared to EV5 VMs. The new VMs offer up to 120,000 IOPS and 4,000 megabits per second of remote disk storage throughput. The increased storage throughput is ideal for data-intensive workloads like SQL Server and can handle high-performance OLTP scenarios and data analytics applications. As a result, customer can consolidate existing workloads on fewer VMs or on smaller VM sizes while achieving the potential cost savings. When it comes to Azure SQL Managed Instance, we are rolling out some really exciting enhancements based on feedback we have heard from customers. I want to talk about 4 updates that go a long way towards helping simplify the user experience, improve engine performance, and make legacy apps accessible as is through Azure, meaning with no or very minimal code changes. As I mentioned earlier, you can use the new link feature in SQL Managed Instance for DR scenarios and to restore data from SQL Managed Instance to on-premises. This feature is currently in limited public preview. We have added a new premium series hardware option with a processor based on Intel Ice Lake that more than doubles the memory per vCore available in the standard series Gen 5 offering. The Premium series is a great choice for workloads that require faster compute and memory performance, as well as improved I/O and network experience. As you can see on the slide, we have also increased the available storage up to 16 terabyte. For general purpose tier, this means doubling what you have got now, and for business critical tier, it means quadrupling it. The increase for business critical is in public preview, and for general purpose, it is in general availability. The last announcement I want to make is the limited public preview of our new Windows authentication capability, which makes it possible to authenticate legacy apps through cloud without changing the app itself. These new features are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the work our engineers are doing to build out Azure Managed Instance. With the latest capabilities rolling out in SQL Server 2022, we are further lowering the barrier to migration through the product itself. For prior instances of SQL Server, we continue to invest in migration tooling that helps to simplify and streamline the migration process. Last March, we previewed discovery and assessment of SQL Server workloads at scale in Azure Migrate. Azure Migrate helps you discover and model servers running SQL, including multiple SQL instances on the same server. It provides best fit recommendation for moving workloads to Azure, including right size based on performance history, service tier recommendation, as well as projected compute and storage cost. More recently, we introduced the SQL migration extension in Azure Data Studio, which is powered by Azure Database Migration Service. The new extension guides you through a simple visit that reduces the complexities of database migration. In addition, if you need assistance with migration, the Azure Migration and Modernization Program, AMP, helps customers migrate SQL workloads at scale and modernize SQL-based applications. With AMP, every customer gets immediate access to curated resources designed to support your migration and modernization efforts, plus Azure technical training and certification tailored to your organization's need. Some projects may qualify for additional migration and modernization support in the form of fast track for Azure engineers and experts that help with planning, designing, modernizing, and migrating your workloads to Azure. For those workloads and applications you are not able to migrate to cloud yet, but you want to manage like a PaaS workload, Azure Arc-enabled data services enable you to run cloud-based data solution on premises and in multi-cloud environments. So you can get the benefits of cloud-like scalability, manageability, high availability, evergreen SQL, unified management, and pay-as-you-go pricing. Azure Arc-enabled data services even supports environment without continuous access to Azure or the internet. I would like to end today by sharing a story from SKF about how the company used Azure SQL and Azure Arc to bring together IoT data captured on-premises systems across its manufacturing plants and combine it with cloud services to improve manufacturing outcomes.
SKF is a Swedish bearing and seal manufacturing company. Together with our network of 17,000 distributors, we cover some 130 countries globally today.
Our challenge is that we have more than 100 factories, and we need to be able to provide them with an IT/OT platform that comes with speed, reliability, and low cost, while providing support for critical production systems. The decisive factor in selecting a hybrid cloud solution was to have a solution that supports more data-driven manufacturing. This shift means that we can look to employ cloud-native operating models where we execute workloads on premises at our factories. Azure Arc enabled data services together with other Azure hybrid services, Azure Edge services, such as Azure SQL Edge, are imperative components. It becomes fundamental to have highly available, scalable, and centrally managed data platforms. SQL is the very heart of the operations performance management in the factories of the future. Using Azure Hybrid Services together with automation tools like Terraform and other Azure management tools allow us to achieve the speed that we're looking for.
We have benefits at every single level of the organization. If we look at the shop floor, the collection of all this data will help us to improve the process and the product performance. At the management level, we will be able to have, let's say, real-time analysis to try to define the strategy and the footprint for the future.
When it comes to the Azure stack, what we see is actually up to 40% hard savings when it comes to the hardware compared to what we have been investing before. We actually are able to monitor the applications running inside the factory. This is something what will help us and gives us a lot of efficiency and cost savings as well. We also estimate that we will have up to 30% savings or reduction of OT-related downtimes of the machinery. Visualizations or reports are helping actually the operators to more quickly react on deviations on the shop floor. We want to come to the point that we are really proactive so that the operators can act before the actual deviation is happening. Preventive maintenance going towards predictive maintenance.
The ultimate goal is to have signals from bearings at our customer sites connecting directly with our manufacturing units, so the production or remanufacturing can start just in time.
We are striving for world-class manufacturing. Digitalization is one enabler on our journey towards world-class. There's a big benefit what we see to really optimize the entire value chain.
I love that customer story. It is powerful to see how Microsoft's data services have helped SKF to drive both proactive and predictive maintenance to achieve world-class manufacturing excellence. And that's a great example of how we empower you by providing a consistent SQL experience from edge to the cloud. Thanks so much for joining me today to talk about databases. Before I sign off, I wanted to share a few links. Visiting our SQL Server 2022 website, applying to be the best of SQL Server 2022 preview and stay informed, attending our Learn Live sessions on Azure SQL Database and Azure Arc-enabled data services, and hearing more about Microsoft data analytics from my colleagues at PASS the week of November 8th.